This is Martin Giles of the Guildford Dragon News, and I'm with Patrick Oven, who's the leader of the Guildford Greenbelt Group. And this is one of a series of interviews with the leaders of the political parties at Guildford Borough Council, with the exception of Liberal Democrat leader Julia McShane, who declined to take part in the interviews. Patrick, thanks for giving your time to the Guildford Dragon.
Pleasure.
And I think this is our first interview.
It is.
Good. I hope there'll be others as well. But so let's get straight into the questions then. It's been some time since the Borough Council election and your first election as a councillor. And in May, your party, the Guildford Greenbelt Group, won all 3 seats in the new Send and Lovelace ward. But your former leader, Ramsey Naggerty, lost his seat in Shalford. What lessons have you learned from that campaign?
Guildford Greenbelt Group is essentially a very local party. Its strength is in the north and northeastern part of the borough. Partly, I think, in fact, fundamentally, because that part of the borough, the electorate feels a strong sense of injustice over the manner of the local plan's creation and implementation. It was a great blow to us to lose Ramsey. I certainly was not looking to be leader of the party and just assumed Ramsey would get in. I believe that Ramsey lost his seat largely due to arguments between the parties as regards heights in Guildford. Ramsey was one of the few people, in fairness to him, who did campaign strongly in favour of a height restriction in Guildford. He wasn't supported. We perhaps could have expected to be supported by the residents for Guildford and Villages, but we weren't. We understand to some extent why that is, because houses have to be built, homes are needed, and to be quite honest, I would rather see more homes on brownfield sites than on Greenbelt.
Okay, we're going to go on to planning, but if there was a borough council election coming next month, would you campaign differently? Would you try and field more candidates? Would there be any changes in the way you'd run it?
We'd try and field more candidates, but of course you can only field the candidates who are prepared to stand, and that was our problem. We had difficulty getting candidates to stand. We won easily in my area, but I think if we'd had another half dozen candidates, we'd probably have got half of them home, because we could have put people up in other areas where there is strong feelings in relation to planning. Okay. Ash, for example.
Right. And would you change any of your major policies?
No. I think our policies are relatively straightforward. We're not, as some people think, anti-development. We're anti the wrong sort of development. We're quite happy to see development, but it must be supported by infrastructure. And the fundamental problem with much of the development in my part of the borough, Send and Lovelace, is that large developments are proposed without adequate infrastructure. Wisley Airfield is the most obvious case in point, a site which is at the very lowest as far as infrastructure in the entire borough. Or equally in Send, we have the large development between Send and Ripley, Garlick's Arch, which is supposed to have not to need infrastructure because it's part of an established development. The reality is it isn't. It's a separate entity.
I'm going to ask you about infrastructure and planning a bit later, but during the campaign, GGG, along with R4GV and eventually Labour, were parties that Robin Horsley advised electors not to support in his widely viewed video, The Battle for Guildford. What effect did the video have on the election result in your view?
Well, I have to indicate I didn't actually see the video, as I only decided to stand very late.
Your curiosity hasn't made you look at it since?
I've not watched it since, no, okay. Because things to some extent have moved on since then. Okay. And quite frankly, it's a case of priorities. You've got to prioritise your work.
Nonetheless, what's your assessment of the impact of the video?
It certainly didn't have any impact in my part of the world. Had it done so, we wouldn't have been elected. There was always a risk in my part of the world that we could split the vote with R4GV and end up with neither of us getting in, but the fact is all 3 GGG candidates were elected, which suggests that at least as far as GGG is concerned, the video didn't have any great effect. I'm not sure that's true of R4GV, but it's not for me to speak for them, but certainly
no, but you can have a view as an observer.
I believe that R4GV lost a lot of votes because they were not sufficiently clear about supporting the villages. They came across, I think, as being primarily a Guildford party rather than a Guildford and Villages party.
And for Ramsey, do you think, for Ramsey Nagati, your former leader, do you think it had an effect in his result?
It may have done, because he lost his seat to the Liberal Democrats. Whether people voted Liberal Democrat rather than voting GGG, I really can't say. I think from what he's told me, his seat was always far from a foregone conclusion that he would win. But it's a great disappointment to us to have lost a man who's so competent and so hard-working.
Okay. Now, since the election, the parlous state of the Borough Council's finances have become even more apparent, and a major accounting error has been revealed. How much of the situation is GBC's own fault, and what should have been done differently?
It's easy to shoot from the hip on something like this. I'm not an accountant, and I think that to simply say it's GBC's fault, or it's the Arthur GV and Liberal Democrat administration, or it's the previous before that Conservative administration, would just be cheap political point scoring. I don't want to go into that. It's I simply
so you
do
don't
not
know how
I
much.
don't I do not
You couldn't
know.
apportion the blame.
No, I couldn't. And I think there's little point in people in infighting at the moment. The main priority has to be trying to act together to sort things out. That doesn't mean to say we don't not hold the council to account. We have to. But at the moment, I simply have not been in the post long enough, or have the requisite background experience to make an educated give an educated decision on that.
Okay. Now, you have said there that the problem needs to be tackled with cross-party cooperation, something you said in the chamber as well. But doesn't that compromise your duty to scrutinise the council?
I don't think it does at all. You know, if you look at something and you clearly think it's wrong, you'll say it's wrong. But there has been, to some extent, some cross-party sniping, largely between Arthur GV and the Conservatives. I really can't see the point of it at this stage.
Okay. Now, your party, as you've said earlier in answer to another question, your party was born out of the disquiet about the local plan. Given the need to comply with national planning policy, which of course all councils have to do, how would you have done it differently? Well,
the first thing I would have done, and which I would like to see done now when there is a review of the local plan, is that there is a proper assessment and an accurate assessment of what population expansion there is going to be in Guildford. I don't believe that the current figure is remotely correct. I believe it's at least twice what the true prospective population growth is going to be. If population growth is wrong, then clearly planning must be wrong, because planning, the whole idea of planning, to my simple mind, is you assess need, and then you assess how that need may best be met. But if your population growth projections are wrong, then clearly your planning need is going to be wrong. I believe with far more houses being built than are actually needed, and unfortunately we're not building enough of the type of houses that really truly are needed, which are not merely affordable housing but some social housing.
Okay, but how you say about the population growth, but why would the government want to ignore the most accurate projection?
Well, it's not really a government issue. This is a council issue. The Organisation of National Statistics obviously is a government or government-funded body. Their figures that we saw last year suggest that the population growth has massively been exaggerated. Guildford, of course, may simply want to seek to get bigger, because obviously the more people you have in houses, the more people are paying council tax. And when you've got financial problems, the more people who are contributing to those problems, the better from your perspective.
Who do you mean when you say Guildford might want
Guildford
to see
Borough Council.
Who?
The previous council.
The Liberal Democrats.
The Liberal Democrats, who are now the current council.
And R4GV.
And R4GV.
Want a bigger Guildford.
I believe that the Liberal Democrats, although they have indicated, because of course they are now in sole control, so they can't blame anybody else from now on. It's up to them now. But I'm not entirely convinced that the Liberal Democrats really have the stomach to see a proper review. What we need is a proper, accurate, detailed review, not merely looking at the local plan and rubber stamping it and saying it's okay, because it clearly isn't okay.
So that's what you'll be looking for.
That's what I want to see. I want to see a really detailed review.
Okay, and you have mentioned this, but there's widespread concern that developments are going ahead despite insufficient infrastructure being put in place. For example, NHS services, school places, public transport, road space, as well as sewage capacity, water supply and power supply capacities. Do you think the lack of infrastructure should be sufficient to delay or prevent development of more housing?
I don't think any major development should be initiated without adequate infrastructure either being in place or being planned as part of that development. Certainly the Wisley Airfield proposal is a case in point. There is no infrastructure whatsoever at Wisley, and the proposals in the plan are totally inadequate. For example, there is a proposal for a primary school, but no proposal for a secondary school. Now, of course, that's up to Surrey County Council, but clearly if children are going to go to a primary school, a few years down the line, they're going to need to go to a secondary school. And it just seems totally illogical to me that primary schools are being planned, but not a secondary school. There is also no clear provision in relation to medical facilities. The medical facilities in the Villages Medical Centre, which currently serves Send and Ripley, are apparently likely to have to take people from the development at the airfield. They certainly couldn't take them at the present time because there is just not the capacity. Speak to anybody in Send and Ripley about trying to get a doctor's appointment and they'll tell you you simply cannot get one for weeks.
For weeks?
Weeks.
Okay, thank you. And the lack of, you have also mentioned this, but I'd like to ask you a bit more specifically about it. The lack of building height control in Guildford has caused a major controversy. The Dragon's small survey in April showed 80% of respondents were in favour of height control. These were Guildford residents. But the council seems powerless to resist applications for high-rise buildings. Where did it all go wrong?
I believe it went wrong when there was no height restriction for central Guildford. Now, of course, people say, well, what do you mean by central Guildford? You could define it as within a quarter of a mile of the centre, half a mile of the centre. Clearly, any definition you have must include North Street because it's next door to the High Street. During the inquiry into the local plan, which is now 5-6 years ago, I spoke on this at the inspector's inquiry, indicating that the contrast between the High Street and North Street, given that they're roads immediately adjacent to each other, couldn't be more marked. In fact, on one morning of the plan, the Guildford Council produced a map of listed buildings. Virtually every building in the High Street was listed. Only one building was listed in North Street. You couldn't imagine two roads so close together being so contrasting. Clearly, North Street has to be developed, but I don't believe 13-storey or even the proposal now to reduce that to 11 stories are the answer. Such buildings would be very visible from the High Street, full of listed buildings, as I say, a beautiful place. And I believe that what should be happening there is a cap on building above, I believe, nothing more than 6 stories high, because that could still allow relatively dense housing in North Street, very close to the railway station and bus station, and help to rejuvenate the shops by bringing people into the centre of the town.
But that's not likely to happen, is it?
I don't think it is likely to happen. Unfortunately, and I have to pay tribute to my predecessor, Ramsey Nagati, he did fight very hard for this.
But then he voted for the North Street.
He voted for it because I think it was a case of you see, you can't vote and look at it and say, well, I accept certain parts. It's not the curate's egg that's good in parts. You have to vote for it or against it. You remember we're predominantly a villages oriented party, and I think from a pragmatic point of view, people would rather see, in my party, and I agree with them, I'd rather see development in the centre of Guildford on brownfield sites than on than by taking sites in the villages out of the green belt and building there.
But isn't the danger that we'll have a town versus villages fight?
I think we have got that already. I think that's the reason why GGG have been returned time and time again now since 2015, because people feel a sense of injustice towards a local plan. The northeastern part of the borough, which is essentially Send, Ripley, Ockham and the Horsleys, is about 19% of the population. Yet the plan alone has it taking 40% of the development. Now that's before we even look at the windfall sites. It always struck me that the problem with the local plan by taking areas out of the green belt is that once you move an area from the green belt, the presumption against planning shifts exactly 180 degrees. When it's in the green belt, presumption against planning unless you can show very special reasons. Once it's taken out of the green belt, presumption in favour of sustainable planning. What this has meant in places like Send and the Horsleys is that a lot of small houses on large plots have been sold, and half a dozen houses are going where there was one or at most two before.
Infill. It's
infill, but of course you end up with a plan that isn't a plan. The whole idea of a plan is you assess your need and how it may be met. What we have now is a planning free-for-all in these villages.
It's just piecemeal.
It's piecemeal development. And I've spoken to the director of the chief planning officer and said, how are you dealing with the amount of applications by way of windfall development? Are you keeping any form of record? He said, oh yes, we are. But he said, you must remember, windfall is still part of the plan. But as I recall, it was anticipated there'd be no more than 50 windfall houses a year in the entire borough. Well, we've seen 50 built in Send already. There's more houses in one village. There are more houses been built in Send since the plan was adopted by virtue of windfall applications than have come so far.
But that is 4 years now.
It is 4 years, yeah. But we've seen several small estates. There's been large developments in Send Hill and on Potters Lane, all developed in the way I say, simply because large houses have been sold and small estates have been built there of 6, 8, 10 houses. Same again next door to the Send Primary School. One bungalow was sold. It happened to be on an L-shaped plot. The bungalow became the access, and the loop of the L at the back has taken 10 houses.
Okay. Well, you obviously feel strongly about it, and I'm sure that you're giving a clear message to the potential voters for if there's any more elections around. And there is, of course, an election coming up, a county council election in your area. And you intending to put a candidate up?
As far as I'm aware, no one has come forward at the moment. I have made inquiries. I've made inquiries of my own to see if anybody was interested. I'm not aware of anybody at the moment from my party who wishes to stand. I have certainly discussed it with Ramsey, and as far as I'm aware, Ramsey, obviously he's not a resident in that part of the borough.
Okay,
anyway.
and you have had election packs with R4GV before. I think they're intending to stand.
We have, and my view is that as R4GV are standing, I think we should sit back on this one.
Okay. So what's given all you've said, what do you think is the future for your party, GGG?
Well, that's difficult to say. See, the very definition of our party makes it extremely local. It makes it local, and it makes it fairly limited as far as issues are concerned. I would hope to see more people being prepared to stand, but I have to be realistic. They're going to be standing in places like Horsley, Clarendon, possibly maybe even in Ash, places that are predominantly rural areas, but which have had a lot of planning pressure on them over the last few years. Okay.
Well, Pat Oven, thank you very much for giving your time to the Guildford Dragon in this interview, and I hope it's only the first of many.
Thank you very much, Martin.